Hey everybody! So today's video I'm going to go through the process of assembling a new bicycle, which in this case it's a basic mountain bike. It's one of the Marlin, Trek Marlin 6s. It's been a super popular bike, but anyways, sold this one to my sister-in-law and I just brought it home to assemble it rather than doing it at the shop. So, you know, figured somebody else is going to be putting together. There's plenty of them that people are buying on the internet now, or you can buy them from Dick's or whatever, some of these places that are decent bikes where you can just buy it in the box. So they're all pretty similar. So let's do a basic run through on this one. Tools we're going to need, I've got basically some Allen wrenches or hex keys, probably like an 8mm, 4 and a 5mm I think is going to be the most common. That's what we'll use on this bike. Phillips screwdriver, got some grease, cable cutters, got a little torque wrench, you know, it's handy to have just in case, pedal wrench. I've got a long 8mm, we'll get to that in a minute, but yeah, let's go ahead and just bust this box open. If you've got a box cutter, you can cut it right along that top edge. That's pretty easy to do it that way. Be mindful, you know, with these staples, if you just pull it open like this, they can definitely scratch the bike. So the way typically the way the bike's, it's going to be in there with the rear wheel attached, the cranks attached, the front wheels just zip tied to the side, usually the seat post going to be just wrapped up, kind of something like that. So I'm just going to set all the parts aside here. Normally there'll be a main parts box. We'll tear into that here in a minute. And then from here, you got these little hand hole things. So usually you kind of poke those back out. It makes it easier for the pull the bike straight up and not get snagged on anything. All right. So that's basically what we're going to have there to start with. Another tool, not really necessary, but I got my little bike stand here we're going to use. So there's another tool, just some diagonal cutters. Actually, you could probably use this for everything instead of having a bicycle specific cable cutters, but normally you'll have some zip ties that are attaching the wheel to the frame. So probably the most time consuming thing is actually just getting all the packaging off. Rubber bands there. Some bikes, if they have a through axle, you got to be careful pulling these little plastic things off, because sometimes they can pull the end caps of, you know, off of the hub there. So all right, let's set the wheel aside. Got a little frisbee. Okay, so usually what I like to do at this point, we'll get our seat post kind of ready. And you know, again, you don't have to have a work stand. It's definitely easier. I'm going to get our seat post in here so we can put it in a work stand first thing. And usually I like to just put a little grease. It doesn't really matter. This is just some rock and roll super wet grease. You know, anything to keep the so this is an aluminum frame. We got an aluminum seat post. If it's a steel frame or steel frame aluminum seat post, either of those metals, you always want to put grease Nice good amount of grease on there, because what can happen if that sits for a few years, gets water down there, those will actually fuse together. Okay, well, I'm going to zoom in on this part because this is kind of a crucial step. So we've got our little quick release here. This one's kind of nice because it's got a little Allen key insert right there. So, you know, otherwise you just want to, you'll cinch that down and basically do it the same as how you would do it on a quick release on a wheel, but as you can see, it's still turning. So I think that's a 4mm, no, 5mm. And I'm just going to tighten that, cinch it down, just kind of like I'm tightening this pinch bolt. You don't need to go buck wild if you've got a torque wrench. Probably about 5 Newton meters or so. Step one, we're just gonna, you know, again, if you don't have a bike stand, that's all fine and good. You don't necessarily need one, but it does make everything easier. You know, you can work on everything with the bike, you know, just comfortable to work on height. So at this point, we're just gonna strip the rest of these pieces off, which are little plastic piece down there that keeps the forks from getting smashed in during shipping. So this piece here, I see these get left on, or part of it gets left on a lot. This is just to protect that derailleur from in the box. But you got this little clip. I see these broken off a lot. Bikes come in for repair with this piece kind of still in there. Okay, so that's the basic. Still got this plastic film on here, but we'll just leave that on there just to protect the bike from getting any kind of whatever scratches or whatnot. So yeah, we'll go ahead and get these bars put on here first. Alright, so these, those are 4mm Allen bolts there. Usually when I'm at work, I'll use my little drill driver. But these bolts have some kind of some Loctite stuff on there, a little bit of grease and a little bit of Loctite, so they are a little stiff to turn. Kind of just keeps those bolts from backing out. Alright, so one little tip you can leave, if you have this type of a cat, you know, where there's two separate ones, I usually just keep one bolt in there and then you can start it like that. Alright, so tip number 2, where people tend to make mistakes on these sometimes, is just the orientation of, you know, you need to be able to look at it and see which shifter is, you know, we've got our 1 through 8 speeds there, 1 through 3, so this is going to be the left hand side. So I'll twist it like this and see what that, and that looks pretty good. The cables are not twisted around each other, they're not doing weird things going around the head tube or the fork. So I'm gonna go right there, and all you do is just hold that in place. You don't have to worry about the orientation of how it should be rotated just yet. We're just getting it kind of mocked up in place. If these bolts, they've got a little grease on them. If they don't, they're just totally dry. Put a little grease on those. Anything threaded on a bike, you should have grease on it most of the time. And this is one of those things where they, you know, it's such a small bolt, they get dry and you know, whatever, it gets kind of seized up in there. You can break these heads right off of these bolts if you're going to adjust it or anything like that. You got these particular bars have these little series of pieces here help you center the bar between these two clamps on the stem. So we'll just get that nice and centered, those two dots, and then from here you can kind of just eyeball the bars to where you think might be a good starting point, and then we'll just cinch that down from there. Actually got my little torque, my Bontrager torque key here. Try to keep the gaps upper and lower on this particular stem even if possible. Some stems, some of the nicer stems, they'll want you to cinch, have one side bottomed out and then the other side you just adjust it. But so this thing clicks off at 5 Newton meters. Alright, so we're good to go there. Next thing, I'm going to attach my brake caliper here. And actually, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's bust into the parts box here. Didn't grab a pocket knife or anything. So, in the box, how to have more fun on your bike. Got our pedals, front quick release skewer, through axle directions for this fork, which we don't have through axles. I guess that's something, it's kind of a good thing. I'm going to make another video about been selling a lot of bikes with through axles and ask people if they're familiar with that type, and they say, oh yeah, and not realizing it's totally different than a quick release. But anyway, that's another story for another video. So here's our disc brake caliper bolts. These are basically the parts we're going to need next. Alright, so we got our, left this thing wrapped up just so it wouldn't smack against the fork and scratch anything. But so we got the cable. We want to go inside the fork leg here. It's got this little piece in here that protects the keeps the brake pads from getting squished in. But basically you can, that's the top, that's the bottom, you know, brake pads. There's no way to get the rotor in like that. You got our Tektro text that's going to face out. So for now I'm just gonna get this started. And go. I'll cinch those down a little bit. I want this to be loose so that we can move that around when we get the wheel in there, and then we can adjust the brakes later on from there. So, got our wheel about to put in. I'm just going to cinch these little 5mm bolts. Not all the way tight, like I say, just get them to where I only have to turn this thing half a turn to get it locked down or cinched down to where it's tighter. Kind of the same thing with these. They've got some Loctite material on there so these don't back out. Okay, so brake's kind of loose. So we've got our quick release lever. We've got 2 springs. See if we can get this in semi in focus. So we got these 2 springs. This is a common mistake that happens a lot because it's kind of a cone shaped little spring there, and so the small ends face towards each other. A lot of times they'll see them like this, and that part fits right over the axle. But if that's over the axle, then the axle won't go up into the dropout. So they need to, basically the orientation is just like so. Right, so a quick release, I like to put a little bit of grease just on those threads, maybe just kind of on this whole skewer all together. Just a nice film. These can get rusty over time. I usually just stick this in on the rotor side. A lot of people like to stick them in for the other side, but it doesn't really matter. So we got our skewer through. Just be careful if you get grease, you know, from putting it on the skewer. You don't want to be getting it on the. Be careful not to touch the rotor and get grease on that. So we got our little pointy end going first of the spring, and we're just gonna give this little skewer nut there a couple turns. And with this being loose, got to pull our little keyway thing out of there. Those are nice to have, you know, if you're ever transporting the bike without the wheel. It's nice to stick that in there so that somebody doesn't inadvertently squeeze the lever and mess your brakes up, because then you have to pry the pads apart because they get stuck together, and it's just kind of a big hassle. So make sure you pull the wheel all the way up, and get a close up here of where you want to look at this quick release lever. So as I've got it right now, that's approximately about where you would want it. I'm going to back this off just as if you're going to take the wheel off, you have to undo this enough to get the wheel past this. These are recessed in the dropouts, that portion, the outer part of the dropout. So get the wheel up in there, and we're going to turn this nut, or you can also just hold the nut and turn the skewer, either which way. But what we want to shoot for is when we get about where this is sticking straight out, you can feel some definite pressure on it there. So I'm going to just keep tightening the nut. So I'd say about right. So again, pulling the wheel up really tight, about halfway across. Usually I'll do it in front, kind of line it up in front of the fork, and it should be somewhat hard to push up that last bit. So you want it definitely tight like that. You don't want that thing working loose and getting your wheel all out of whack. All right, so that's, I don't know, probably tip 3 and 4 with the skewer. Just giving the brakes a quick squeeze. They both feel pretty good. One thing I've noticed on some of these Tektros or even the Shimano's, you got these little compression nuts where they thread in. Just make sure those aren't super loose. Those should be tightened to like 6 to 8 Newton meters generally, is kind of maybe industry-wise somewhat of an average, I guess. Let's before we adjust that front brake, let's just start back at the back of the bike, and well, actually let's go ahead and put our pedals on. This is the last bolt-on piece. I'm gonna put some grease on the threads, and if you're not already aware, there are left and right specific pedals. You can't just put either one on any old side. They have to. That's because the threads are reversed on the left, the side over here opposite of your chain and all that, the drivetrain side. So non-drive side, threads backwards, and you can tell. So there's actually a L and then an R stamped on that part, but then also normally there's some on the left side. There's some weird markings here, little knurling marks where this one's totally smooth, which is just normal thread. Right side, we'll take our normal one first. That should thread in just nice and easy by hand. if you're going to be riding the bike super aggressively, you might want to look into getting some pedal washers from a bike shop or Amazon or whatever. That kind of helps keep the pedals from digging into the crank arm. So both of them, just threading them in. This side, the easy way to think about it, pedals go this way, taking them on, that way, taking them off. It's a 15 millimeter. It's a pretty thin gap. So you can't just use a normal hand tool. Sometimes you can if you have one, you got a few 15 millimeters, grind it down or something. Okay, so tip number 5, I think maybe. This is a good way to make sure these are good and tight. If you just hold on to the wheel and then tighten it down, and then this side here basically, even though it's reverse thread, it tightens in the same direction as if I hold that wheel. So you definitely want the pedals snug down. That's probably, I've got a rash of bikes. Kind of we're in the middle of this bike boom, and I'd had at least 4 bikes last week from competitors' bike shops that they just didn't, they hand threaded the pedals in. They're trying to put the bike together so quick that just gets overlooked, or it's not torqued. Person rides the bike for a couple days and then the pedal falls out, and it always gets, oh, this bike's a piece of junk. But what happened was the bike assembler just didn't get that tight. So that's a crucial spot. These spindle bolts are a crucial spot as well. I've got my semi-long, it's just an 8 millimeter hex key. This is pretty decently tight. Normally it's this side, the non-drive side, which usually falls off on these, but that one's pretty good too. You just want to make sure those are good and tight. I think it's probably 45 to 55 Newton meters maybe. I'm not exactly sure, but I just get it about as tight as I can wrench it with something this long. So let's just go through the gears. I'm going to start at the back, and one of the first things I look for, I'm going to spin this around and see if it does it on this bike, which it's actually not bad. Okay, so most bikes, when they're partially assembled like this, a lot of times they're actually not too bad. But the number one thing you don't want to see happen, I've got it up on the big cog, but I can just manually, we'll shift it all the way down, and just manually, if you take and just rotate the derailleur up, push it, you can feel the little nub hitting the end of the low limit screw. And if I could push this derailleur to the point where the chain high sides goes over and wants to try to crawl between the spokes, or you got this little spoke guard here, if it tries to go between that and then the top cog, we need to tighten our low limit screw in somewhat there. So we're good there, good on the high limit. So that part's already done. That's just something it's easy to check. Next is going to be just our cable tension. So just going through the gears. This has got a full run of cable housing. Sometimes you can just shift it up without pedaling, and that'll put some stress on the cable. You might work it, the exposed pieces. So we may need to fine tune it just a hair with our barrel adjuster. And normally the easiest way to do it, whichever gear you should be in, if you're not sure what that is, you might just start at the bottom and, let's say, shift up 3 times. We know we should be in that 3rd gear. So 1, 2, 3. All right, so what we're going to do now is just look at this from behind. And it's always hard to get this in on the camera because your eyes kind of can look at it more of a 3D. Well, what you want to do is you got the 2 opposing cassette cogs, and if you look at it straight from behind, you want to line the upper pulley, or what they call the guide pulley, and you should be able to see just even amount of space between the 2 opposing cogs. I'm going to turn this adjusting barrel maybe half a turn. That's going to get us lined up right where we need to be. Again, I don't know about, you know, these are the bikes that I build the most as far as a basic mountain bike, and the majority of the time these things are pretty dialed in. So we'll get that set. Now we're going to the back, or the front derailleur. Not sure how difficult that is to see. We've got the chain here. So the gap between the chain and then this inner plate, we want to shoot for just, with this being in the big ring here in the back, or this has just got 2 gears, so small ring there in the front. And I want to adjust the low limit screw till we just barely have a little bit of clearance in there. Right now, you can hear that it's rubbing just a bit, so I'm going to back. Okay, so I don't know, see if you can see that or not. See if I can get this in focus. But there's a H next to this one and an L next to this one. So this is our low limit screw. I'm going to back this one out about a quarter turn maybe. Trying to hold the camera steady and see what I'm doing at the same time, which is could be a little bit of a challenge. So we're just going to back that off a little. Oh God. Sorry, doing the camera work and the mechanical work, so that looks pretty good. I'm okay with that. Alright, so we're back on the tripod. Okay, so we got that dialed in. I'm going to shift it to the small cog now in the back. That's good. We're totally cross-chained this way and it's not rubbing, so I'm okay with that low setting. That actually looks pretty good on this end as far as the adjustment. It's the same thing. We want to have a little bit of space. You know, and I'm pushing this cable. You can see how it's moving a little bit. That's just right there is the very furthest point it can go. Might tighten that in just a very tiny touch, the high one. About the same amount. Just want to push on it, verify it's not rubbing. It's rubbing a little there, and that just is a good indicator, you know, especially since we lowered that, we put a little slack in the cable, so there's an adjusting barrel. Try not to make everybody sick. Right here, it's on the front shifter. So I bet if we turn it counterclockwise, maybe about a turn or two, and let's go maybe a half turn more. I might have got the high limit screw, just there we go. Okay. It looks pretty good everywhere. Got our cross chain there. It's not really rubbing. I mean, if it's rubbing there, you may have to tighten the high limit screw in just a tiny touch more. Okay. Back off the high limit screw a tiny bit more. I'm listening for the rear brake, maybe rubbing. I don't hear anything. So we're definitely going to do the front brake. The little brake bolts there, they're 5mm, so I'm just going to verify that these are tight. That feels pretty good. It's something that's pretty crucial on a new bike, is the especially if it's a disc brake, is to make sure those disc brake mounts are tight. Well, forgot that thing. Had another little plastic piece on the other side. And then it's also good to verify that the rear quick release, don't always just assume this stuff is tight. That's tight. Gonna go ahead and just back it off anyway. Just verify that the wheel is all the way up in the dropouts, which, you know, you want that all the way. If that's crooked, you set your brakes and adjust your gears, and then pull the wheel out and then put it back in all the way up where it should have been in the first place. Then you'll find that everything's going to be not right there. So back half of the bike is all good. Now we're just going to adjust this front brake. Let me see if I can get a spot here where we get a really good visual on what we're doing. Alright, so we're looking at the bike from the front, kind of straight down. Let's zoom in here, get really close in on that rotor caliper. Oh yeah, I'm getting a good visual there. So you can see as that rotor's turning right there, we got daylight. If I can hold the bike steady, there we go, on either side. If I squeeze the brake lever here, you can see it. There we go. You see the brakes, brake pads pushing up against the rotor. Alright, so one little trick you can do, tip number 7, 8, I don't know. So I'm going to squeeze the brake lever in, and then I'm just going to tighten these 2 bolts, one right after the other, and I'm basically just getting them not much more than finger tight. And we'll check it again. And it's still looking pretty good. So at this point, alright, so what I like to do now is I'll kind of go back and tighten these just ever so slightly, just a little bit back and forth. And what can happen is if you just tighten one really tight, it can shift that caliper. If you just go back and forth gradually until it gets pretty tight, and then you can put the correct torque on it, which these need to be fairly tight, probably 8 Newton meters or so. That's good, not rubbing. Alright, so let's go ahead and pull this thing down. We'll make a few other adjustments and we're done. I'm gonna go ahead and just take it off the stand, and going to, the bars are, stem's crooked from the front wheel, so I'll go ahead and back these 2 pinch bolts here. It's kind of the same thing here. You won't want to just undo one all the way or tighten one all the way. You want to always tighten them. If you're fastening the stem down, tightening it, you want to do them in sequence. And same thing if you're taking the stem off or adjusting, loosening it up, you want to go into sequence too. So just lining my stem up there with my micrometer. Make sure the preload, it felt pretty tight, but just double check. You know, sometimes when these bikes are new, after a few rides, everything kind of seats in place. Shifting wise too, you may need to give it a quick tune up and retension the cables or retighten the headset. Sometimes these bolts, the disc brake bolts, you know, under a few good stops, those can have a tendency to back themselves off when the bike is new. So that's always kind of that 2 weeks, 30 days, just depending on how much you've been riding the bike. It's always good to check all the torque on the bolts and things. All right. Yeah, we're more or less done. These grips are they're a lock-on style. Typically, they're not always tight. You can lock on grips, just a little 3mm wrench, and normally just sitting up on the bike, you know, I like to just, you know, you're in a neutral position, you got your seat height, you got your seat height set, neutral. I could probably go a little higher on this one, but you know, kind of the grips, you want them to fit nice in your palm there, and then brake levers. These feel actually pretty good. I think I picked a pretty good spot for the bar rotation. But you want it to be just everything nice and neutral. You don't want to be going like this or down like that. You want it to be nice and just a neutral, comfortable position. Same with the shifters. You might find it a little more comfortable if you move the shifters in just a little so they're not sticking out into the grip. I don't know. That's just kind of personal preference. Yeah, you need to make sure if you got lock-on grips, make sure those are good and tight. Probably check this seat post real quick. Got a few. If you don't have lights, you might keep the reflectors on here until you get lights if you're going to be riding it in the street. This is a seat rail clamp, saddle clamp, whatever. Yeah, that's nice and tight. So, you know, if you need to adjust this, you can adjust them fore and aft or level. You know, kind of the fit process. There's lots of other videos on that, but hopefully this video was helpful if you're looking to put one of these together. You know, when in doubt, take it to a shop, get it checked over. You know, we charge, I think, $35 at the shop I'm at to do a check over on something like that, something somebody's put together, and just need it gone over, make sure it's safe to ride, the gears and brakes work. So, you know, ready to just take all these film pieces off. I'm gonna put some air in these tires, and would take it out for a test ride, but it's raining right now, so yeah. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe to my channel if you're into bike videos, and we'll see you guys next time.